So there's a sense in, and I'm convinced that community is really rooted in, community is actually sustained, not just through feeling warm feelings about people, but through the messy aspects of need. Mm-hmm. So there's a sense in which if you decide that you and 3 of your buddies are going to share a router, or you know, some kind of other power tool, you're entering into this kind of contract of what I think of as neo-neediness. You really could all afford to have one yourself. But by not having one yourself, and by having to accommodate each other's schedules, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And make sure that everybody keeps the thing sharpened or whatever, suddenly you're in this awkward situation where you have to actually be in a practical relationship with someone, mm-hmm. instead of a kind of merely spiritual relationship. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, I think it's like a discipline like fasting. I mean, mm-hmm. You learn things when you undergo that kind of deprivation. Mm-hmm. And you learn about, you learn things about yourself, you learn things about others. So anyway, I think that those kinds of disciplines, I think...
Let me interject a point before you go into that, because that resonates so much for me too. When we think, I made the argument about sort of the drive for security is an engine to a lot of our consumption. But the other thing is our idolatry of convenience.
Right.
You know, I mean, we're just so, if we can afford to just sort of buy it ourselves, you know, we love convenience. And so, you know, for me, the whole time banking kind of thing also becomes an expression, in a sense,
right.
of spiritual discipline, because now, so I've either got to wait until Todd can come and install the shelf. Now, I mean, I own a Visa card. I
right.
make a decent salary. I could
right.
just call up, and there's like a million stores. Like, there's like whole stores called, you know, 60-minute blinds, you know.
Right.
I mean, like, everything is organized for my personal convenience. And so I could, like, get this task done in a phone call if I'm willing to spend the $180, you know, or I actually have to have the spiritual maturity to sort of say, you know what, like, my life is not going to end if I have to wait 2 weeks until Todd can come over and put my shelf up, even though, you know, I want it up.
Right.
You know, and so that whole thing about convenience and recognizing how much money are we willing to really spend on convenience? And then to sort of ask the question, now, where is convenience sort of okay? And where does the very fact that we have the ability to spend money so that everything can be very convenient, how is that actually spiritually pretty harmful? Because it begins to create this, your word, sensibility, you know? And so now all of a sudden I kind of want my relationship with God to be kind of convenient too. It's like, you know, now I want to be able to pray and get an answer. Because every other aspect of my life, I can kind of problem solve, and I've got the money to just make it happen, and I haven't begun, you know, I'm not learning about, like, waiting.
Yeah, yeah. And for those of us who've raised children, we know that convenience and efficiency are not high on the list of concerns for what we do as parents. We probably... what time?
I don't know.
Where are we on the schedule? We're supposed to, like, take questions soon, aren't we?
Yeah, yeah.
I want to really thank Ken for giving us the historical and the philosophical background of why we're in the mess we're in.
Yeah.
Because if we don't understand that, we'll be right back in the same mess, in some other kind of mess. If we cure all these problems, we'll be in some other kind of mess. And that's why I appreciate so much what you do through the Marge Sale Journal, because you know, we get these underpinnings that we don't get other places, and I really appreciate that. And it also gives you wonderful resources for books that help you understand these things.
Thank you.
The question that I had was, how do we translate all this head knowledge into experiential knowledge? And it's really the knowledge of the truth and experiential truth. How do we make this translation?
A term that often isn't used as much in Protestant circles as in Catholic circles is the term practices. Sometimes we talk about spiritual practices, but that's a term that I think is a very helpful one to ask, or even the word disciplines. What I think to start with specific practices, as some of the things that Amy's recommended, and to look for others as well, and so that. And I think the idea of starting small, so start with developing a level of I mean, there's always a danger of legalism in these sorts of things, and that's something we need to be really. One of the reasons why I think all of the theory matters is so that we don't just become legalistic and say, here are rules we follow. If we follow this, God will be happy. And that is dangerous. But I do think that it becomes practical and lived out only as we start being really deliberate with very small and specific things, like this mutual ownership, or attending to where our stuff comes from, how it was developed, and I listed. I mean, part of the struggle we have is that it's so hard to imagine an unconventional way of living that doesn't seem weird. And you know, we're all. I think there's a sense in which, because we're created to live in community, that means we're created to live conventionally. We're created to live in a kind of harmony with the way of life of others. But when the way of life, when we're living in Sodom or Gomorrah, living in harmony with the way of life of others is not a good thing. So, and it seems to me that the church should be a community where we live conventionally, but counterculturally. So the church is a place where we cultivate those practices together, even though it makes us look Amish, maybe, in some way. So again, I'd say that the deliberateness of recognizing how the conventional practices of your life, how they may be distorting your perception, your understanding, your loves, your proper reliance on God, and then figure out, and you know, there are more books written on these kinds of things now than there were when I was a young man, that are very deliberate, talking about alternative practices. One that's not come up at all that ought to is how we think about the Sabbath. That's one, that is a discipline rooted in economics. You know, if you look at the Ten Commandments, it's easy to see the stealing one as having to do with property, and the covetousness one. But the Sabbath also has economic consequences and promises attached to it. I actually think the fifth commandment, honor your father and mother, that you may live long in the land to which I give you. I think there's actually an implied idea of kind of social continuity, which is tied to economic life. But yeah, back to the Sabbath. I think that would be. You know, there's a case where Christians once had a shared way of life that included practices that had economic consequences. I was talking with Dave this morning about Marshall Field, the department store magnate in Chicago, started the department stores. Not only were his stores not open on Sundays, which was, no stores were open on Sundays, but he would actually drape the display windows on the street because he didn't even want people to window shop on Sundays. So Saturday nights, his employees had to hang up drapes so that nobody could look at things. Now there was a shared practice and a shared convention that the church's convictions had shaped public and cultural practice. We're not in the position now where our convictions shape public practice. So we either go along with public practices, which are often disordered, or the church should strive, not legalistically, but in the effort of wisely encouraging well-lived life. So that's. Did you want to?